Things Hoped For by Andrew Clements. Day 7. Robert's omelet is served, and as I pour out the egg mixture to start cooking mine, I notice my hands are shaking. But I'm curious, and I say, "So, what is this other work?" It's a casual question, but right away I feel like I shouldn't have asked. The juice glass descends, then a napkin lifts slowly off the table, dabs the air, and returns its place. And his voice says, "I'd rather not go into that, but I can tell you that it's an endeavor that has a kinship with the grand old English tradition of Robin Hood." I flip my omelet, and even though the man scares me, I'm still curious, so I ask another question. "Do you just sleep in stores? Like, anywhere it's warm? Do you mean, am I a homeless person?" "No, I rent a comfortable flat north of 14th Street, situated above what used to be a meat-cutting plant. It's a one-level floor walk-up, and I have my own door at street level, with an electronic entry pad, which saves me the trouble of keeping track of a key. I come and go whenever I wish, and my neighbors do not seem to notice or care when my door opens and closes at odd hours. New York is a lot like London in that way. Everyone basically minding his own business. I have groceries delivered to my entryway once a week. I did have a break-in last September, but the burglar took an unfortunate tumble down my stairs. I waited until he had a television in his arms. Poor lad thought no one was home. And as I lay at the bottom of the stairs, as he lay at the bottom of the stairs with a broken ankle, sharp things like forks and pencils began to mysteriously float through the air and then suddenly jab into his arms and legs. Quite a lot of howling. The fellow finally managed to flee with relatively minor injuries, but I am certain that neither he nor any of his colleagues will ever be back. He had a frightening experience. I'm having the same experience right now. I flinch as the last of William's omelet disappears, followed by a final few bites of toast, and I can imagine the flexing of his jaw muscles as he chews. Imagine him reaching up with a long fingernail to pick a scrap of food from his teeth. There's a smirky sneer on his face. I don't have to see it to know it's there. Maybe he was a decent person back in his former life, but not anymore, and I don't want him in my home, or in my life, or anywhere near me. Compared to this man, my Uncle Hank is a teddy bear. Yes, Uncle Hank's been a bully, but William, if that's even his name, William is doing stuff that's really nasty, and he's doing it on purpose. And he's smirking because he knows he can get away with anything he wants to. And if I could, I'd push him out the door right now, this instant. I'm at the table now, and I take a drink of orange juice. It tastes sour. Everything seems to have turned sour. Sour and surreal. "Something wrong, Gwen?" There's a mocking caring in William's voice. I shake my head and turn my attention to my plate, angry that I left my thoughts show on my face. He goes on, his voice oozing sarcasm. "You look as if you're disturbed about something." "Ah, of course, your grandfather. Poor dear. How insensitive of me. And here I am intruding on your grief, even making you cook for me. I should be ashamed of myself. I really should. I'm afraid I haven't made a very good first impression." His chair scoots back from the table, and Robert gets to his feet as well. "I must be going now. Robert, if you'll escort me to the door, that would be grand. And when I'm standing on the front steps, we shall shake hands like gentlemen, and that way you'll know for certain that I'm outside. And that way you'll both sleep better tonight, knowing that I'm actually gone, or at least actually outside." Again the smirk. His voice has moved across the parlor, and the hallway door opens. Robert follows, and then the street door opens, and watching from beside the table, I see Robert put out his hand. And there's a shake, and then Robert's inside again, fast, shutting both doors. "And put the bar in place," I say, but Robert's ahead of me, already fitting the bottom of the brace rod into its four-socket. He walks back to the table and sits across from me. "That is one creepy guy." I nod and then shiver. "He's awful. And I'm sorry I doubted what you told me earlier, but until it's right there, it's just too unbelievable. Because this afternoon on the subway, when I dropped Robert's story into the same bucket with Belinda's alien adventures, I couldn't see how this invisibility stuff would ever affect my own little story. And now William has changed that. My story has been picking up a lot of passengers recently. Too many. I say it again. So I'm sorry I doubted you." Robert waves my apology aside. "But now, what do I do?" he asks, "because no way am I going to tell this guy how to reverse the process. He shouldn't have that information. He's a crook, you heard him. He's Robin Hood. That means he steals from rich people, which has to be why he likes it here in New York. Except I bet he doesn't give a cent to the poor or anyone else." "But I already figured that out." I stare at Robert. "What do you mean, figured what out?" "It was in yesterday's newspaper. There's a big story in the Times about more than a dozen unsolved robberies. Van Cleef, Van Arpels, Bulgari, Harry Winston, all the top jewelry stores in the city. A salesperson and a customer will be sitting across from each other, and the customer is looking at some rings or necklaces, things that cost $200,000 or $300,000 each. And suddenly, one or two of the items is missing, just missing. It's not the salesperson stealing, and it's not the rich customer. So guess who's taking the stuff? William reaches over, closes his hand around a nice chunk of jewelry, and it disappears. Then he walks out the door and probably makes a phone call to somebody who can sell it for him. And the same sort of shoplifting has been happening at all the big diamond wholesalers on 47th Street. Our new friend is a major thief. And the most recent store was Tiffany & Company. 3 robberies in the last 2 weeks. And do you know where Tiffany's is? Right at 57th and 5th Avenue, which is just around the corner from Nike Town. It has to be him. I'm quiet a minute, trying to sort through everything. I can't, so I ask, so what should we do? We have to do something, don't we? Shouldn't we tell the police? Robert shakes his head. Because what happens if it becomes this huge news story? Because it would. And suddenly everyone knows there's a way to make a person disappear? The FBI and the CIA will get on the case. I'm sure of that. And they'd figure it out. They would, because the first thing that guy would do is tell them about me. And then my parents would be involved. And then Alicia and her parents. Because this process is dangerous technology. Especially if it gets into the wrong hands. And it would all come out. It would all come out. His thoughts trail off, and he looks tired and confused. I look at my watch, and it's almost 7:30. It feels more like 3 a.m. I'm beyond tired, beyond drained, beyond exhausted. I'd like to go to bed, or at least take a nap. Then I think about my bedroom. I'm not a superstitious person, but I don't want to go downstairs to my bedroom. Downstairs is where Grandpa was. And while I'm wondering if Robert is bothered by stuff like that, he says, are you going to think I'm terrible if I tell you that I want to stop thinking about all this and go down to the basement and practice a while? So that answers that. He's not only fine about going downstairs, he's going to walk right up to the yellow crime scene tape stretched across the back hall, take a right turn, walk down into the dim basement, and then play his trumpet. I shake my head. No, that's fine. You need to. I'm just going to stretch out here on the couch and try to calm down. It's a lot to deal with in one day. Yeah, it is, he says, then a very sweet smile. And you've been incredible, really. And it's my turn to do the dishes, okay? Before I can say thanks, he comes over and he's giving me a hug. And it makes me feel like I'm 8 years old, sitting in the pickup, snuggled between my mom and dad on that long drive we took to Memphis. Just the 3 of us, safe and warm on a country road, with the wipers slapping rain from the windshield. I could say, folded against him like this for hours. And then suddenly we're both embarrassed. We separate and I say thanks for doing the dishes. Sure, no problem. Happy to help out. He picks up his trumpet and goes down the stairs. I take the dark green fleece blanket off the back of Grandpa's recliner. I sit on the couch and try to make the room stop spinning, and it does. Then I lie down. I spread out the blanket and curl up, pulling it around my shoulders. My mind wants to review the day, spin back through every detail, sort of file and categorize and judge every event, every person, every moment. But I don't allow it. I do what my mom told me to do when I called home. She said I could trust it all to God. She said I was being watched over, and I reach out because that's all I want to do, to be watched over. I'm almost at peace, and then I'm crying because of Grandpa. It's the blanket. It smells like his aftershave. But I calm myself again, and I trust Grandpa to God as well, because honestly, there's nothing else I can do. And sometimes trust has to be enough. Chapter 15, Reinforcements. Cell phone. My ring. Morning light is coming through the shutters, and I'm tangled in the green blanket on the couch trying to get the phone out of my pocket. Hello? Hello, sweetheart? How are you doing there? Hi, Daddy, I'm fine. Are you coming? I'm already in Newark. Be at Penn Station in about an hour. I wanted to call last night, but your mama said you'd be in bed early after such a hard day. How'd everything go? With the police and everything? It was okay. After about 2 hours, everybody left. Except for Robert. He's a friend from the music camp at Tanglewood last summer. He's in the city for auditions, same as me. And I didn't want to be alone. Uncle Hank was here for a while, too, so he knows about Grandpa. And Mama was right. I fell asleep on the couch around 8 o'clock. I tell Daddy about the meeting at the police station in the afternoon, and then he has to go get on his train. See you soon, Gwenny. Grandpa's bedroom door is shut, and I'm thinking Robert is still asleep. Daylight makes this house more cheerful, so I walk downstairs to my room. After I shower and dress, I go back upstairs, and there's a note from Robert. Have to run errands. Be back about noon. Practice, Robert. I know it's good advice to practice, and before, no one would have needed to remind me, but I can't. Daddy's coming and the place needs to be tidied up. Robert did load the dirty dishes into the dishwasher, but he cleans up the way my big brothers do. The kitchen and dining area are still a mess. I start to open all the shutters, and then I remember William. For all I know, he's right outside trying to see into the house. It's a bad feeling, and I leave the windows covered. After I finish the dishes, I walk to the table, pick up the chair William sat on, and put it over in the corner. I don't want to use that chair again. It should probably be reupholstered or burnt. Then I move the daffodils back to the center of the table, and they're still as bright and fresh as ever, tossing their heads in sprightly dance. Thank you, Mr. Wordsworth. Robert's back a few minutes before my dad arrives, and I'm glad because I want my dad to meet him. But as the front buzzer sounds, Robert smiles at me and then disappears down the stairs with his trumpet. Hey, there she is. In the middle of my dad's bear hug, I remember how much I love my family, remember how much it means to have that love always there. But even during this sweet moment in the doorway, at least half my mind is watching on high alert, making sure there's not room for someone to slip past us into the house. The William thing is making me completely paranoid. Robert made me promise not to tell my dad or anyone else about that situation. But there are plenty of other things to talk about. And we do, for almost an hour. And during that time, neither of us says anything about Grandpa. And as we talk, my dad does a good job of hiding how sad he is that his own dad is gone now. But I can still tell he's torn up about it because I know how I would feel. When Robert comes back upstairs, right away my dad grabs his hand and says, I want to thank you for taking care of my little girl last night. It means a lot to me. Robert's sort of embarrassed, but he smiles back and says, sure, no problem. I mean, it's not like she wasn't doing great on her own, but I was glad to be there. So, Daddy says, what'd you think's gonna happen at the meeting, at the police? Got any clues? It's hard to remember that my dad grew up in Queens. His accent sounds like pure West Virginia, which I think is actually much nicer. I shrug. There's that letter Grandpa sent to his lawyer. That's got to be important, don't you think? Robert nods his head. Probably. Has to be important. My dad says, well, we're all going to know soon enough, I guess. And he's right about that. We have time to eat some soup and sandwiches, and I get Daddy moved into Grandpa's bedroom with the sheets all changed and everything, and then it's time to walk to Broadway and hail a cab for the ride to the police station. The 24th Precinct station is on 100th Street next to the playground in the middle of the block. It's also close enough to an apartment complex called the Frederick Douglass Houses, more than a dozen buildings that fill most of the area between 100th and 104th Streets. Westside High School is close too, and I get a quick look at the public school I'd attend if I actually lived around here, and if I didn't have a scholarship at Latham Academy, and if my family and my grandpa hadn't helped me become a classical musician. So many ifs. Mr. Grant is already inside the station waiting for us, and shortly after, Detective Keenan takes us up a short flight of stairs to a conference room. Uncle Hank walks in. He and my dad have a quick hug. Both men are genuinely happy to see each other. With a big smile, still holding my dad at arm's length, he says, I don't think I've seen you since that summer before you went into the Army. My dad nods and says, that was a real camping trip. Great memories, great memories. And my perception of Uncle Hank shifts again, because I can see how narrow a view I've had of the man. He really is someone's uncle and someone else's little brother. I'm sorry it took something like this to make me figure that out. I look around the room, and that's when I notice it's got one of those mirrored glass walls. And right away, I get the feeling I'm being watched. The detective takes charge, pointing at chairs for everyone, including a court stenographer, who moves to a corner facing us, sets up his portable keyboard, and then nods at the officer. Okay, first let's see this letter you brought, Mr. Grant. And everyone, please speak clearly for the stenographer. The lawyer reaches into his briefcase, pulls out the tan envelope, and passes it to the detective who's sitting across the table. Detective Keenan says, I am examining the postmark, which is Thursday of last week. This is a stamped and sealed registered mail envelope and has not been opened since received at the offices of Kenneth Grant, attorney at law. He passes the envelope back to Mr. Grant. Mr. Grant will now open the envelope in clear view, and we'll determine together if any of the contents are relevant to the case at hand, that being the suspicious death of Lawrence Page, from former residents of West 109th Street, New York City. The lawyer tears open the envelope flap and pulls out 3 smaller sealed envelopes. Mr. Grant says there are 3 standard number 10 envelopes here, each sealed. One is addressed to me, Kenneth Grant. One is addressed to Henry Page, care of Kenneth Grant. And the third is addressed to Gwendolyn Page, also care of Kenneth Grant. And now I am opening the envelope addressed to me. He does, and he takes out 2 handwritten pages and reads them each silently. No one is talking. so the stenographer's fingers are still. Looking around the table, I'm the only one not trying to read the lawyer's face. Except Robert. He seems uncomfortable, and he's glancing around the conference room. Maybe the two-way mirror makes him jumpy. Then Robert notices I'm looking his way, and he flashes me a tense smile. Clearing his throat, Mr. Grant passes the letter to the detective and says, After you take a look at this, if there are no objections, I'll read each page aloud into the record. While this includes some personal business of the deceased, I believe it is relevant to these circumstances. Detective Keenan scans the pages, says, I agree with that, and then hands the letter back. Mr. Grant says, For the record, I am reading from a handwritten page, and I'm confident that the handwriting can be proven beyond all doubt to be that of my client Lawrence Page. He adjusts his glasses and begins, first reading the date at the top of the page. I am Lawrence Page. I am writing this of my own free will, sitting alone in my own home. Whoever's reading this knows that I'm gone now. I want anybody who's concerned, and I'm sure that's a number of people, to know one thing for certain. No one but me had any part in getting me into the freezer chest that's located on the ground floor of this home. This was my idea, and I put myself in there. I'm sorry for the way it looks, and I'm sorry for the fright it must have given someone when I was found. As I'm writing this, I'm at the point in life where I know what's going to happen next. And I don't want anybody but me to feel responsible about making decisions, what to do or what to do for me during my last final days. So I have made my own decision. Folks might disagree with what I've done or the way I've done it, and I expect someone will. But there it is. The people who know me and love me will understand, and they are the only ones I care about. Lawrence Daniel Page. My dad wipes a tear from the corner of his eye, and Uncle Hank blows his nose into a handkerchief. And I'm crying too. I can hear Grandpa's voice so clearly. I don't really understand why he did this, but I know that I'm one of the people who loves him, and Grandpa says that I'll understand. So I will. So I hope I will. Detective Keenan pushes a box of tissues in my directions and takes a few, and I take a few, and I say, Thank you. Mr. Grant then takes a second page from the envelope. This, he says, is not technically relevant to this proceeding, but I want to publish it into the record of this inquiry, so there's no doubt that it came from the same envelope and that it was written by the same person. And again, he begins to read out loud. I am Lawrence Page, and by my own hand I am revising my last will and testament. When and if the property on 109th Street is sold, from the part of the proceeds that belongs to my estate, I want enough money to be set aside to pay the entire cost of tuition, room and board for the college and postgraduate studies of my granddaughter Gwendolyn Page. If that property is not sold, then the necessary money should be taken from other available assets in my estate. In addition, immediately upon my death, I want $35,000 taken from my personal funds and given to the same Gwendolyn Page for the purchase of a violin and a violin bow of her choosing. I also want enough money to be provided from the funds of my estate so my granddaughter Gwendolyn Page can continue her musical studies here in New York without interruption until the end of this current school year. These three provisions will be administered by my attorney, Kenneth Grant, as part of his duties as the executor of my estate. Mr. Grant looks up and says, and this codicil is signed by Lawrence Page and witnessed by Jason D. Renzo of the same address as the deceased. It is stated on the last day that my client was seen alive. Robert is smiling and nodding at me, and everyone looks pleased, even Uncle Hank. I'm all weepy again, but the lawyer said, doesn't surprise me. Here's my grandpa an hour or two before he dies, and he's thinking about someone else. It's beginning to fit. Looking at the detective, Mr. Grant says, Shall I open and read these other letters? The detective shakes his head. I don't think it's necessary now. So Mr. Grant reaches to his left and then his right, handing out the remaining letters to Uncle Hank and the other one to me. The policeman says, We've got the preliminary coroner's report, and as of the moment, this case is pretty much closed. Mr. Grant raises his eyebrows. So it's suicide? And everyone else around the table winces at the word. Detective Keenan says, Actually, no. Mr. Page took a small oxygen bottle into the freezer with him, so he didn't suffocate. And he was all bundled up in his coat and cap and boots, so it wasn't the cold either. And he'd put a piece of duct tape over the freezer latch, so he could have opened the lid and gotten out any time he wanted to. The coroner is 95% certain that this man would have still passed on, no matter where he'd been at the time of his death. He chose a strange place to lie down, but it's accurate to say that he died in his sleep. According to the coroner, Lawrence Page died of natural causes. Standing up abruptly, the detective walks to the door. Sorry to rush everybody along, but I've got to ask you to leave now. We'll be in touch as needed. And then the detective stands there, one hand on the doorknob, as the group files out of the room. I'm the last one out, and I'm expecting the detective to follow me, but he doesn't. He slams the door shut on my heels, and then 3 other non-uniformed police officers in the hallway line up at the door, knock once, and slip back into the conference room. One of the 3 men has a big video camera. Before Daddy, Robert, and I are more than 20 feet away, I hear shouting from the room, then the sound of furniture banging around. I hesitate and look back, but Robert says, "Come on, just keep going. That's got nothing to do with us." But I stop, and then Robert does too, and I look at him, because it sounds like he's afraid. Then from behind the closed door of the conference room, someone yells, "Get your bloody hands off me!" It's a man's voice, and he has a British accent. My heart stops, and I gasp. "Isn't that—" But Robert shakes his head and makes a stern face at me. "Let's just go, okay?" The others are already outside, so we go down the stairs and out to the police station, and then we hurry to catch up with my dad and Uncle Hank. Mr. Grant is already in a cab, and he turns and waves to me out the window, and I smile and wave back. Then we are walking behind Uncle Hank and Daddy, and I start to say something to Robert, but he whispers, "Not now." So as we cross Amsterdam Avenue and go downhill toward Broadway, I'm left with my own thoughts. And I'm thinking about that. I don't believe what Robert said, that the commotion in the conference room has nothing to do with us, because I'm sure Robert's involved in this right up to his dark brown eyebrows. And that means I'm involved too, but if I don't want to, even if I don't want to be. Chapter 16. Comeuppance. My dad takes us all to a steakhouse for an early supper, so it's over an hour before I get to talk to Robert alone. The meal feels awkward. There's only one thing on our minds, but none of us wants to talk about it, about what Grandpa did or how the investigation turned out, even if it was as close to a happy ending as anyone could expect. Those generous gifts to me are almost embarrassing. I feel like I've been picked as the favorite Grandpa's little pet. Even so, I can tell that the others are all happy for me, Uncle Hank included. 3 times during the meal, my eyes filled up with tears, thinking how sweet Grandpa is to take such care of me. Then Hank and Daddy start telling stories about growing up in Queens with Grandpa and Grandmother, about trips to the Bronx Zoo and Coney Island and Jonas Beach. And before long, all 4 of us are laughing. And just when I'm starting to feel happy, my dad says, "I called Veterans Affairs before I left, and since he's a decorated officer, they're going to send us a color guard and a bugler, and they'll have a presentation flag too. He'd want you to have that, Hank." And the 2 men start talking about all the other arrangements for Grandpa's funeral. So I say, "If it's okay, Robert, I'm going to walk back to Grandpa's." My dad says, "Sure, sweetheart, but I'd rather you took a cab." I make a face. "Daddy, I'm a city kid, remember? Besides, it's not even dark yet." He pushes the $20 bill into my hand. "Then here, take some money anyway and stop for a treat somewhere. You're pulling out before dessert." Robert thanks Daddy for the meal, and then we're outside. Before we're 30 feet from the restaurant, someone calls out, "Gwenny." I know that voice. It's Uncle Hank. Robert says, "I'll wait here for you." I walk back, and when I stand in front of him, he talks fast, like he has to get it all out in one breath. "I feel bad the way I acted and about what happened. I wanted you to know that. Said some mean things, too. Can't undo anything, but I wanted you to know. The fuel costs hit me, that's all. Couldn't even pay my drivers last week. This is hard for him. He's looking down into my face. It's okay, Uncle Hank. And what happened? It wasn't your fault. I know Grandpa didn't blame you. He even told me not to judge you. And I don't. I think everything's going to be all right, don't you? Because that's what I hope." He nods awkwardly, smiles a little. "Well, got to get back inside. See you soon, Gwenny." "Bye, Uncle Hank."